Think gadget reviews, news, and all about it.
OnePlus 2 Review. Where Samsung & Co. go to great lengths to try to persuade you to buy their phones, it can at times seem as though OnePlus makes buying its phones deliberately difficult. First, you can only buy them from the OnePlus store. Second, you need an invite to even place an order. An invite? Who the heavens do these people think they are? And yet, this hasn't stopped hundreds of thousands from scrabbling to get their hands on the new OnePlus 2. What's the big deal? Actually, deal is the key word. The OnePlus 2 gets you specs on a par with £500-600 phones such as the Galaxy S6 and HTC One M9, but only costs £289. And that's for the 64GB storage version. There's an even cheaper 16GB model incoming too. It's pretty special. And absolutely worth chasing after if you have the patience to cope with the unique shopping experience. Scratch my back. One of the real head-turning elements of the OnePlus 2 is that no part of it feels like it belongs in an affordable phone. It out-premiums the LG G4, for example, with a metal band that runs around its sides and an unusual rear texture that feels nothing like good old plastic. Those of you familiar with the OnePlus One may remember this style. It's a rear cover texture that sits somewhere between felt and sandpaper, giving you a rough and gray surface that has some of the tactile vibe of fabric. I find it a much more satisfying feel than glossy or even soft-touch plastic, although if you hate the sound of this style, OnePlus also offers covers finished in Kevlar, rosewood, bamboo and apricot, the tree, rather than the orange fruit itself. There are plenty of touch sensations on offer, each quite different from the norm. You do have to pay around £20 extra for each of these, but it's not a bad deal when they feature real wood and Kevlar, not just a plastic veneer. Casting quite a shadow. Aside from the unusual backs, the OnePlus 2 is also a bit larger than some of this year's Android contenders. It's a lot bigger than the Galaxy S6, for example. Some of this is down to the large 5.5-inch screen, but there's also the battery to consider. OnePlus is out to cater for hardcore mobile fans over just about everyone else, and that means the OnePlus 2 has favored specs such as battery life and power over weight and skinniness. At 9.9mm thick, the OnePlus 2 isn't exactly going to force everything else out of your pocket, but it is a bit chunkier and heavier than most. At 175 grams, it's a good 20 grams heavier than the LG G4, for example. If you absolutely hate larger phones, this might be enough to put you off entirely, but I haven't found any of the usability nightmares that cropped up with the also chunky Nexus 6. The key thing is that the hardware buttons on the side are dead easy to reach, and that stretching for the soft keys doesn't feel like a thumb workout. There are also several thoughtful little touches to the OnePlus 2's design. Where else among Androids do you get a little three-way switch on the side, allowing you to immediately silence notifications or switch to only allow priority ones through? This cinema-ready switch sits on the left side. The camera lens has also been shunted down the back a bit, so I haven't once ended up ruining a pic by resting a finger over the lens, and believe me, that happens quite a lot with some of the phones I've been testing of late. The OnePlus 2's camera placement does look a bit odd, but you'll get used to that far quicker than you'd teach your finger to not sit where it's naturally comfortable. Biometric Warrior. For the OnePlus 2's real hardware special moves, though, look no further than the home button at the bottom of the display. It's not a mechanical button at all, but a touch-sensitive panel that also houses a fingerprint scanner. We've seen all kinds of scanners in phones over the last year, some good, many not so much. This, thankfully, is a good one. You don't have to swipe your digit, just press it on the sensor, and its accuracy is pretty excellent. The only times it's struggled are when my fingers have been wet, and any capacitive fingerprint sensor would struggle like this. While the Samsung Galaxy S6 and iPhone 6 get extra Smarty Pants points for fitting the scanner into a clicky button rather than a static pad, the OnePlus 2's scanner feels just about as fast and reliable. You can teach the phone up to 5 fingerprints, although 99% of the time I ended up using my right thumb. It's easily the most intuitive choice if you're right-handed. A pretty well-connected contender. There are other neat hardware improvements to note since last year's OnePlus One 2. The OnePlus 2 has dual SIM cards as standard, both tiny nano SIMs that slot into a tray under the back cover, which is held in place by an array of little plastic clips. It also has a USB-C connector rather than the usual microSD one. This is reversible and so much less of a practical pain than current microSD. We'll start to see loads more phones use this in the future. However, it's still ultimately just a USB 2.0 port, not one that gets you the sort of bonus file flinging speed that'll be the norm once USB-C is the default. 4G coverage has been fixed too. One of the big issues with the original OnePlus One is that while it has 4G, it doesn't support the 800 MHz band, which most networks in the UK use for their 4G signal. On some networks it's effectively a 3G phone. The OnePlus 2 has pretty comprehensive 4G coverage for today's networks, 2 thumbs up. Every design choice in the OnePlus 2 feels deliberately considered. And that's just as true when you consider the bits left out. There's no NFC, for one. This features in just about every other Android phone at the price. OnePlus says hardly anyone used it in the first phone. Is it possible the company nixed it just before it had chance to go mainstream? Time will tell. An IR blaster is missing too. You get one in the Galaxy S6 and LG G4, but I imagine that OnePlus decided that, as with NFC, it would be more sensible to ditch it and save a few pennies. And presumably plenty of pennies have had to be saved to hit that delightfully tempting price. Can you live without QHD? The main area where this creeps in is the screen. Whether you say it's to save a few quid or to make battery life better, the OnePlus 2 has a 1080p Full HD screen rather than the QHD type Samsung and LG fit into their top-end phones. Across the 5.5-inch display that provides 400 ppi density, which is obviously much lower than the QHD competition. But does it matter? The OnePlus 2 screen is still very sharp, and the tone of it is lovely. It has none of the try-hard color oversaturation of the LG G4, or the skewed palette of the price rival HTC One M8s. For the price, this is a pretty terrific screen. And it's a very strong one at any price. Outdoors visibility is great, if not quite Galaxy S6 level, top brightness is very good and it looks right from any angle. For the tech heads out there, the OnePlus 2 uses an LTPS IPS LCD screen. Too many acronyms? That means it'll get you great viewing angles and improved power efficiency. Thanks to the awesome contrast and color of Samsung's OLED phones like the Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge, it's not a contender for the best screen out there. But I don't miss the extra pixels of QHD. Size is important too. 5.5 is a good size for a bit of Netflix action, and doesn't leave you with a phone that feels ridiculously big.